Well, welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 12 of Prince Caspian, Sorcery and Sudden Vengeance.
Nice.
If there's any one you'd ever repeat, it would be this one. This is the best chapter title we've had all season.
Sorcery and Sudden Vengeance.
Were you excited when you turned to this page?
No.
Oh, you just shut down. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening.
And
we don't have a chance to introduce our special guest. We've ended the episode, but maybe should we go ahead and introduce him?
Let's introduce him.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Graham, and I'm the resident fashion advisor of the podcast.
That's is
true.
correct. Yeah.
This is looking good.
Yeah. None of our listeners will ever know, but we're looking good today. Maybe we'll take a picture afterwards and post it on Twitter.
The show notes below.
Well, Graham comes to us. He's a good friend of Phil and mine. Phil, yeah, I think that's grammatically correct, right? And Graham, we're really excited to have you today. Brings kind of a new voice here. You have been following along with the show for a while, and actually we're so excited reading Prince Caspian. You read ahead. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was pacing with you guys until chapter 4, and then I just couldn't wait, so I read the rest of it.
Pull it ahead.
Before we even jump in, then, how do you feel about Prince Caspian as a book, without spoiling the last couple chapters?
Have you read the whole thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, in its entirety, and I'll probably, after this podcast,
I've
go
always
back and
wanted
finish
to
the book
do that.
again. I don't know why it gets so much hate. I think I've enjoyed the story. It's definitely different from the rest of the books, but I've enjoyed it. So.
Is it your least favorite Narnia chronicle?
That's a tough question. I feel like it's probably a tie between Prince Caspian and... Ooh, I think it actually might be Prince Caspian.
So it is your least favorite?
Yeah, I think it might be.
That's
yeah.
fair.
But I don't think it deserves, like, hatred.
Yeah,
or, like,
it's your least favorite of
right.
7 good books.
I really love the other
That's
ones.
fair.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's something to keep in mind whenever we talk about this. These are still fantastic books. We're just ranking them within the...
Well,
Right, within
you've
the-
only
yeah.
read 2, so...
Yeah. 3.
Which one's your favorite, Phil, so far?
So far? I don't know. I've only finished 1. So probably The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
That's fair. Well, Phil, actually, before we jump into our chapter summary, last episode we had chapter 11, The Lion Roars, maybe one of my favorite chapters that we've had so far. And in that chapter, the Pevensies and Trumpkin, they followed Lucy to Aslan's house. And as the chapter ended, the girls were with Aslan watching the merriment unfold with Bacchus and Silenus, and the boys and Trumpkin ran off towards Aslan's house. And we didn't get to hear much from them, so now we're going to find out what happens. So take it away, Phil.
Oh, chapter summary time. Trumpkin, Peter, and Edmund approach the mound via a dark stone archway, where they hope Caspian is waiting. However, before they make it to Caspian, they hear loud voices, and Trumpkin stops the boys in order to listen. They hear Nickelbrick complaining that the horn didn't bring any help, and although Truffle Hunter points out that it has not brought any help yet, Nickelbrick proposes a new strategy. After introducing the werewolf and hag that he brought along, he reveals that he wants to bring the White Witch back to Narnia. The hag agrees that this can be done, claiming that you can always get a witch back. But the Doctor, the Badger, and Caspian are horrified. A fight breaks out, the boys and DLF rush in, and moments later, the 3 that wanted to bring the witch back lie dead. Then they have breakfast.
The end, right?
They have breakfast.
That is, when you put it that way,
So
it is an
I thought
odd
about-
bookend.
I thought about not putting that in summary, but then I looked at the chapter again, and
I
I
was
thought,
like, nope, this is significant.
that is what happens.
Yeah.
They do have
3
breakfast.
people die, and then they have breakfast.
And it's a pretty quick. I don't know if we don't want to jump too far ahead, but it is odd.
To the
Like,
last page.
there's 3 beings lying dead. I guess they take their bodies away, but we just killed people. Like, I'm hungry. It's very interesting.
Well, presumably they've had a long journey.
Yeah.
At this point,
I
right?
guess so. I don't
And
know.
it
I've
seems
never
like Caspian
killed
and the rest
anybody,
have-
so
Spent the entire day getting kicked in the butt. So
that's fair. But they don't even eat a good breakfast. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah,
let's start here at the beginning of the
Let's start at the
chapter.
very beginning.
Well, what jumps out to y'all? But before we really actually get into this, anything jump out about this chapter, Phil? It didn't seem like you liked it.
No, to clarify, I didn't like it at first, and then upon rereading it, I liked it much more.
What about it was not likable?
Well, this is always the problem. If you have characters that are unlikable, it affects how you feel while you're reading the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty invested in this story right now, and there's some pretty nasty characters, and they want to bring the White Witch back. And when you really think about it,
It's pretty messed up.
Yeah, it's so messed up, and it's really a scary thing to think about.
Yeah, I feel like this chapter especially was kind of odd. I don't know. I mentioned it to you, Daniel, before, but it seems like it's just in Aslan's house. It's the one room, the few characters, and it seems, though there are many pages dedicated to it, it seems like it all happens in a matter of like, I don't know, 5 minutes. And so it's just a very kind of short window into what's happening at the time.
See, that's why. Oh man, I love this chapter, and that's why I really like it. It's very different pacing wise from most of our chapters. I mean, like you said, it all takes place within maybe the space of 30 minutes, maybe less than that, and it's a whole chapter. It's got a lot of twists and turns here. I mean, I really don't think you see, Nickabrick has been more of like a morally gray character, but goes full on bad guy. At this point, brings in some pretty scary looking things, and they want to bring back the White Witch. And this is such a dark turn that it is very surprising, and I love it. I love the pacing. I love how different this is from the rest of the book so far. But I can understand why someone would be like, I'm not into this.
Right. We had a very limited amount of communication right before this episode. And Graham sent me a message. He goes, "This is a weird chapter." And Daniel messages me, "Did you like the chapter?" And I thought you were saying you didn't like it. But it sounds like you actually did like it, and you're hoping that...
I could kind of tell that this would be something you're not interested in as much.
Really? Oh, you read that well.
It's with someone like Nickabrick. See, I'm really intrigued by him as a character, and we're going to get to it later. But even the idea that like maybe if the horn had worked faster, he wouldn't have gone bad. Right? Caspian makes that point later. And that, to me, what an intriguing character, especially in children's literature here, that we have somebody that it's like, oh, this maybe could have been prevented kind of thing. But I know that you and Anna are really similar in this way, Phil, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you don't like a character's actions, it's really hard for you to buy into like wanting to engage with them more in the story.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a desire to kind of push away from that.
Yeah, I feel similarly when, like, particularly in movies, if there's like a scene where it's like just a lot of bad plot line kind of developing where the evil is winning, I'm typically like, will kind of subconsciously disinvest in those parts because I don't like them.
Yeah,
that's fair. All right, well, the chapter starts off with Trumpkin and the two boys going into the mound. There's some badgers there who are keeping watch. They go in. And they pretty quickly post up. Are they hidden like behind a rock? What is this? They're watching this scene unfold, but they're not engaging with it. Are they hidden, or are they just standing outside the door? Did y'all understand that?
I believe they're just on the other side of the door, like literally right outside the room.
Yeah. So there's an actual door, because I have some of the imagery from both the BBC version and the movie, which is like it's stone, so I'm not really imagining a doorway because it's a cave.
Right.
Yeah. I was picturing a hallway of a cave. They're in the hallway, and maybe there's a turn to go into the room, but they're not visible.
Yeah. Well, it definitely says the door of the central chamber, so that's what's interesting to me, because I have a hard time, like, is it a wooden... I don't know. We're getting off topic, but...
the illustration doesn't show a door, which I think is interesting. But when they approach and it says the light from... Does it say from under the door or the light of a doorway?
Yeah, can door be used interchangeably as a doorway? Because I was picturing there's no physical door.
Also, it does say the light from under the door.
Full-blown door. That's what we got.
So...
Well, why don't we talk about what's happening behind the door?
That's why we pay you the big bucks, Graham.
Yeah. We have never mentioned that we pay all of our guests lots of money to be on here, right?
Yeah, what's the hourly rate again?
We'll talk about it off camera later. Did I just say off camera? I'm sorry.
Wow.
All right, well, let's jump back into the text here. Then at last they saw a light ahead, light from under a door. And now for the first time they heard voices, for they had come to the door of the central chamber. The voices inside were angry ones. Someone was talking so loudly that the approach of the boys and the dwarf had not been heard. "Don't like the sound of that," whispered Trumpkin to Peter. "Let's listen for a moment." All three stood perfectly still on the outside of the door. "You know well enough," said a voice. "That's the king," whispered Trumpkin. "Why the horn was not blown at sunrise this morning? Have you forgotten that Miraz fell upon us almost before Trumpkin had gone, and we were fighting for our lives for the space of 3 hours and more? I blew it when first I had breathing space." "I'm not likely to forget," came the angry voice, "when my dwarfs bore the brunt of the attack and 1 in 5 of them fell." "That's Nickabrick," whispered Trumpkin. "For shame, dwarf," came a thick voice. "Truffle hunters," said Trumpkin. "We all did as much as the dwarfs and none more than the king." tell that tale your own way for all I care," answered Nickabrick. "But whether it was that horn was blown too late, or whether there was no magic in it, no help has come. You great clerk, you master magician, you know-all, are you still asking us to hang our hopes on Aslan and King Peter and all the rest?" I must confess, I cannot deny it, that I am deeply disappointed in the results of the operation," came the answer. "That'll be Dr. Cornelius," said Trumpkin. And I really, really enjoy this passage because, if I'm honest, I can totally see where Nickabrick is coming from here.
Yeah.
I mean, how do y'all feel about it?
I think it's tough being a reader here because we know that help is right outside the door. And so it's almost hard to justify or align with Nickabrick's position knowing that. But that said, I think I can certainly relate to a position of like, okay, nothing else is working. I've got to resort to my own devices here.
Yeah. And I think if I were to reflect on how I usually act in situations like this, very loosely like this.
Yeah, what situations you in that are like this?
I've got a lot of talking animals in my house. I am very likely to want to take matters into my own hands and start taking action, do something, because I feel a responsibility there. And I think he probably has a twisted sense of responsibility here too. He seems to really care about his own kind and he's looking out for them. And it's just, I think I want to relate to the other characters, but I actually relate to the bad guys in this situation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure with me, I'm more annoyed with Truffle Hunter's lack of reason than I am with Nickabrick's lack of faith. Like Truffle Hunter literally in just a couple paragraphs is like, they could be right outside the door right now, which is fun, like little wink to us as the readers. But I'm legitimately like, Truffle Hunter, are you like, this isn't going to happen. Like, grow up. And that's how I feel as I'm reading this. And Nickabrick's, until there's a turn in a couple of pages.
Right.
But at this point, I'm like, I totally empathize with Nickabrick. And this is a perfectly crafted scene from C.S. Lewis's perspective, especially when you think about this as children's literature, because I think Lewis is doing this really genius thing where we as readers, put yourself in the minds of, let's say, a 9, 10-year-old reading this, where you don't necessarily want them to empathize too much with the bad guys here because they might have a hard time differentiating between these. I think about that sometimes. But because we know that our protagonists, that our heroes are right outside the door, we see kind of the foolishness in Nickabrick's hastiness to just forget all of his faith. Had we just been reading this story and not know anything about Peter or any of the Pevensies returning or Aslan returning like we saw last chapter, it'd be really easy if you're reading this as a child to be like, of course we should side with Nickabrick. I mean, I as an adult know that they're there and I can empathize with them. So it's great the way that C.S. Lewis puts our characters in these places where, as if you're reading this as a child, you still see what is clearly the right thing to do, even though the bad guy, if you will, kind of makes a good point.
Right.
It's beautiful writing by Lewis. Great just scene setting here.
And even the way Dr. Cornelius admits that he's disappointed, he's kind of a wise figure, especially to Caspian. And then to have him say that, everybody's affected.
It's like when you're growing up and you like see your parents make a mistake or just see them doubt themselves. And you're like, wait, I thought you knew everything. It's kind of what's happening. I'm sure that's what's going through Caspian's head right now. I mean, he's really not done a great job being king so far. They've just continued to lose Narnians, and really their backs are literally up against the wall at this point.
Yeah.
And now his mentor is also like, I don't know about this, y'all.
I'm disappointed too.
Yeah. Up till this point, Nickabrick is making at least a little bit of sense as far as his frustration with the Pevensie, the High Kings and Queens, and Aslan not showing up. But then we hit this pivot here, where he kind of makes some decisions that pretty much put him in the just, he's a bad guy. So there are two visitors. He has two friends. He says, these friends of mine who are with him. So first, who we'll soon find out is a hag, introduces herself, but is more like, I want to help. I've got some spells. I'd love to help if I can. And she ends with the line of, oh yes, no one hates better than me, which is very concerning. And Dr. Cornelius is very concerned with that. But What
She also implies that she's going to use some stuff that it sounds like is not the right thing to do, but she's
not
like,
going to get the job done.
As long as everyone agrees with it, I'll do it. And it's like, that's terrifying.
Yeah. And so Dr. Cornelius it seems to be frightened by this, but I think what comes next is even more frightening.
A dull gray voice, at which Peter's flesh crept, replied, I'm hunger. I'm thirst. Where I bite, I hold till I die, and even after death, they must cut out my mouthful from my enemy's body and bury it with me. I can fast 100 years and not die. I can lie 100 nights on the ice and not freeze. I can drink a river of blood and not burst. Show me your enemies.
So that's pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
And maybe still at this point, maybe as a reader, a first-time reader, you're like, Jesus hung out with sinners. Like,
I don't know, man.
Like, maybe you're still like,
werewolves.
Yeah, maybe this is okay. We don't necessarily know that it's a werewolf yet, right? Spoiler. But
I'm sorry, I forgot that we're not the kind of people who just like start at the end of the chapter.
No.
Wait.
I'm trying to think, and even maybe Peter and Edmund or Caspian himself are like, this is weird. I'm concerned, but you're not like completely terrified yet. But as they continue, we hear that Nickabrick has a plan, and why don't I go ahead and read what that plan is? So before we do that, Caspian and Truffle Hunter do say you want to call somebody back because Nickabrick says we'll bring someone back who can help us more than Peter and the rest of the kings and queens and Aslan. And Truffle Hunter says, you can't bring Aslan back. If the kings and queens haven't come, why would Aslan come? And this is how Nickabrick responds. No, you're right there, said Nickabrick. Aslan and the kings go together. Either Aslan is dead or he is not on our side. Or else something stronger than himself keeps him back. And if he did come, how do we know he'd be our friend? He was not always a good friend to the dwarves by all that's told, not even to all beasts. Ask the wolves. And anyway, he was in Narnia only once that I ever heard of, and he didn't stay long. You may drop Aslan out of the reckoning. I was thinking of something else. There was no answer, and for a few minutes it was so still that Edmund could hear the wheezy and snuffling breath of the badger. What do you mean? Said Caspian at last. I mean a power so much greater than Aslan's that it held Narnia spellbound for years and years, if the stories are true.
The White Witch!
Cried three voices all at once, and from the noise Peter guessed that three people had leapt to their feet. Yes, said Nickabrick very slowly and distinctly. I mean the witch. Sit down again. Don't all take fright at the name as if you were children. We want power, and we want a power that will be on our side. As for power, do not the stories say that the witch defeated Aslan and bound him and killed him on that very stone which is over there just beyond the light? But they also say that he came back to life again, said the badger sharply. Yes, they say, answered Nickabrick. But you'll notice that we hear precious little about anything he did afterward. This is pretty serious stuff happening right now.
It is. It's very difficult to read because I think when I'm reading Aslan, I think about Jesus, and Jesus also hasn't been around for a while in a physical form here.
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem like people are saying similar things.
Yeah, I think Nickabrick's state of mind is really evident in this dialogue. It's so interesting how he starts questioning, if Aslan did even come back, who's to say he would be our friend?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he and his kind did not experience that. But who's to say the White Witch would be either? It kind of is a logical fallacy to presume that bringing back a witch who was a tyrant 10 times worse than Miraz would be for you just because you brought her back.
Well, I think that's the question here that you bring up, Graham, which is Nickabrick evil or is he just desperate?
Mm-hmm.
Is he like, no, I want to bring her back because I want to worship her and I want to follow after her? Or is it, hey, we tried this Aslan thing and it didn't work. So we've got to find somebody else who can solve this problem. And I'll turn to whoever it is that'll solve the problem. And what do y'all think? Evil or desperate?
I think desperate. But I think that desperation has driven him to like some pretty evil stuff, and I'll comment on that in a moment. But later he says, what we want is power. And she has power. You know, she kept Narnia spellbound for 100 years. And I think that's really what he's after here, is just somebody that can show up and take things down, you know? And he's kind of like, I'm not really concerned with who gets taken down. I just want some power to fight with.
I agree. I think there's desperation for sure. What comes to mind is there's a line from one of the Avengers series films where Loki says, "You must be really desperate if you want my help." And I forget how desperate they must be because we've been following the Pevensies around, and it's kind of fun. But he is pretty desperate, and I think this shows how desperate he is, that he's willing to try to bring the White Witch back.
I think technically that's one of the Thor movies and not one of the Avengers movies.
Yeah, well.
Same universe.
I felt that as I was saying it.
That's fine. I'm just being silly. But yeah, I would agree that too. I think this is desperation that causes him to look into very dark places. I think he already was always
like a dark world.
Yeah, he was already in kind of a place.
Of the Thor movie.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, thanks for explaining it. I think he was already in a place where he could go either way, and it's his desperation that's been, look, I went with you guys for a while, but now it didn't work, so I'm going to turn my head over this way and see what they have for me over here. I think his friends are definitely 100% evil. I think the hag and the werewolf, yes, definitely evil.
They're here for a fight.
But he is he's aligning himself with them because he still wants what the Narnians want. And they both want to get rid of Miraz and restore, I think, peace to Narnia. I think that's what Nickelbrick still wants. Obviously, we know that's true about Caspian. I guess to restore the order and allow the old Narnians to return to the place they used to have. And I do think Nickelbrick still wants that, but he's willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And maybe that's the issue, is that we can't do whatever it takes. We have to follow some kind of ethics here, like not bringing back the White Witch from the dead.
Right. And I think it's interesting, and we'll see this in a moment, but last I checked, if you're going to get your friends on board and summon a witch back, there's no real need for a werewolf. Like, you don't bring a werewolf to a witch summoning, you know? It's like, it's kind
true.
of, so it's like, okay, sure, maybe he just wanted to help, but he's looking for help in the wrong places. But he also brought a werewolf, probably expecting some opposition. And so that's where I was kind of saying, like, yeah, sure, I think he's desperate, but he also brought this person that probably is only good for biting and killing and not letting go, which wouldn't seem necessary if you were just going to summon a witch.
Yeah. There's a really interesting part as the chapter goes along where Nickelbrick says, she's talking about the White Witch, was for you humans, but she was against some of the beasts. And he mentions that there are no beavers left in Narnia, which is a really quick sentence, but it's also like really sad to be like, wait. Yeah, those were our friends. And obviously they wouldn't still be alive, but they're like, there are no beavers in Narnia anymore.
I wondered if we met the last two, and that puts a very different spin on the book that we just read before this.
Yeah, I thought that was a weird kind of throwaway line that I don't think C.S. Lewis included for no reason, but it's sad to hear there's no more beavers in Narnia.
Also, one thing to bring up, and maybe this again points to Nickelbrick's mindset, but when comparing Aslan's power to the White Witch's power, he said that she was able to hold Narnia and her power for 100 years. To me, that doesn't sound that long. I don't know how many. Yeah, it seems like it's been thousands since the Pevensies were back in Narnia, and so to me, it just seems like, okay, she had power for 100 years. And then once winter was over, then it's been a very long time after that where presumably she wasn't in power and presumably Aslan's power was in effect.
I think that's the question, though, because Aslan himself didn't stick around. The White Witch was around.
But like the kings and queens that he established did hold power for presumably longer than
it would have just been the 20 years because there was only about I can't remember the exact amount, and I'm sure some of our listeners can let us know. But they're only, I think, by the time they leave, Lucy goes from being an 8-year-old, and at the end of Wardrobe, I think she's like 22, 23.
Oh, yeah.
So they're only in power for like 15 years, and I think we are to presume that there were no other there were no other sons of Adam or daughters of Eve who were leading Narnia until the Telmarines invaded. And while they are, but they're not sons of Adam, daughters of Eve kind of thing. So I think I kind of understand where he's coming from. If my understanding of Narnia history is to be correct, which it easily could not be, it's that they're really like their reign, the golden age of Narnia that we talk about, was actually really, really, short.
Yeah, interesting.
And so it kind of makes sense that Nick was like,
I hadn't thought about that.
She held power way longer than they have. In that case, I'm not sure why he's not just aligning himself with the Telmarines, though, because they've held power for a long time. I guess they want to kill him, so that makes sense. But
fair.
It is one of those things where why is that the standard? Why is that what you're measuring it with? How long someone ruled should be the quality of the rule.
But I think his idea is, hey, I'd rather be. They weren't slaves, but the dwarfs were definitely they served the White Witch. So I'd rather be a servant for the winning side than die a hero. I think that's maybe what his kind of idea is. It's survival. And it's not. He's more externally focused than just his own self survival. Like he talks about the dwarfs a lot. So it seems like he is for his group of people. He's not really thinking past the dwarfs, but he is saying, look, this would be better for us as a people group or as a dwarf group. They're not people, but and so I think he is a very complicated character. And he's definitely gone to the dark side, if you will, but he's still, you kind of still see, I empathize with him still a little bit.
Yeah.
I definitely don't, I'm not saying his actions here are the right ones, but you kind of can see what has driven him to this place.
Oh, 100%. And it's interesting. I know you brought it up, Daniel, just a few pages ago, but where Truffle Hunter is like, they could, the help may be even now at the door. And just kind of relating it back to my faith and times where someone who has more faith than myself in a particular situation, like you said, sounds kind of naive and ridiculous. And will say like, it could be an hour from now or tomorrow that the help comes. And it's just like Truffle Hunter where they're like, it could be outside the door. And it literally is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, that like stood out to me the second time I read through the chapter. I was like, wow, that is like when I'm like frustrated with the person who's like, no, it's going to come. The help is going to come. Then it's like, but actually they could be perfectly right.
And we talk about the novel's theme. C.S. Lewis's, what he said about it being about the restoration of the true religion after corruption. Truffle Hunter, in my opinion, is actually really the one carrying that torch because he is such a good example of just this childlike faith. Because honestly, I think it annoys me. I think I mentioned earlier, he seems stupid. Like, dude, give this up, man. Like, they're not coming. But he has that childlike faith. It's like, I'm just going to keep believing. I know it doesn't rationally make sense. There's no reason behind it. But I'm going to continue to believe that this will happen. And so I think he is the prime example of what it looks like to restore that faith back.
I think Truffle Hunter's lines don't make any sense unless they're true.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely
crazy. And because it's true,
if it's not,
he's the only one that's making sense.
Yeah, he's really tuned in.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's good. Well, getting back to the text here, right before I'm going to read about this little battle that ensues here. My one question before we do that, where Caspian says, Knickerbrick, you're going to use black sorcery and you're going to call up this ghost. Obviously, that doesn't happen because this fight breaks out instead. But do y'all think that they could have brought back the White Witch? Is that actually a possibility here? Obviously, the hag was going to try, but could that have actually happened?
I would say yes. I think that the dark magic in Narnia is it's been around since the actual beginning of Narnia, and so I think that there is a strong possibility it would work.
My first reaction to those kinds of questions is usually no, because I'm used to living in the real world. However, I am aware that they're talking animals, and a lot of the rules are thrown off. And this is actually where fantasy gets a little bit difficult, because what are the rules?
Right.
Science fiction doesn't always have this problem because the rules are usually established, and it has to make a little bit of sense. It's like introducing time travel, which it's more of a science fiction thing, but you have to be clear on the rules, otherwise people feel thrown off.
Yeah.
And if they did bring the White Witch back in this book, I would feel pretty salty about it.
Yeah.
Just that character is dead and should stay dead. And
Right.
if she's not dead, can anybody be dead?
See, my idea of this is that dead is dead, right? But they could maybe, even if they did some kind of quasi pseudo resurrection, that it wouldn't really be her. It might be some I don't think that they can completely bring. Now, I think they could bring back something similar or do some kind of. I mean, I don't know. The magic in Narnia is we know very little about it,
Right.
really and truly. But I don't think they could actually bring her back. I think maybe I don't know. Actually, I think not to. I don't know. Have you all seen the movie, the Prince Caspian movie?
Mm-mm.
I won't spoil it. Well, it's whatever. But
I know the end of the story. Go ahead.
I know other people might not like this, but they have the scene where the White Witch kind of comes back inside of, I think it's like ice or glass. I have not seen the movie in a while.
Mm.
And she's able to speak, but she definitely is not physically like a body is not there. And so I'm sure a lot of like Narnian fans hate that this is a change, but I don't actually mind it. I like this idea that, and it was really just a reason to get back a big actor like Tilda Swinton to be like, hey, come back, look who this famous person in our movie. But I get the feeling, whether you like it or not, that if she was able to come back, it would have been more like that and not a full like, bam, she's here just like she was before. I don't want to like she's dead, and I want her to be dead. I don't want her to. You know.
Right. It seems like they would be able to draw on the power of her magic in whatever they were going to do.
Yeah.
Perhaps not bringing her right back into the room.
Although I will say, and I can't spoil this because we haven't gotten there, there's a connection to the silver chair that makes me wonder maybe she can come back, or maybe other things too. That just there's a long running question in the Narnian series about a character in the silver chair and their connection to the White Witch, and so that's all I really say there. But it does now I'm maybe even thinking a little differently. But let me jump in and read this battle. The next minute or so was very confused. There was an animal roaring, a clash of steel. The boys and Trumpkin rushed in. Peter had a glimpse of a horrible, gray, gaunt creature, half man and half wolf, in the very act of leaping upon a boy about his own age. And Edmund saw a badger and a dwarf rolling on the floor in a sort of catfight. Trumpkin found himself face to face with the hag. Her nose and her chin stuck out like a pair of nutcrackers. Her dirty gray hair was flying about her face, and she had just got Dr. Cornelius by the throat. At one slash of Trumpkin's sword, her head rolled on the floor. Then the light was knocked over, and it was all swords, teeth, claws, fists, and boots for about 60 seconds. Then silence.
It's so good. I was thinking of it. It reminded me immediately of Peter's first battle with the wolf in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Which is coincidentally chapter 12 of The Lion, the Witch,
noticed
and the Wardrobe.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but where it was like, it's all like blood and heat and fur, and it's just kind of that same like swords, teeth, claws. And it's so tactile, I feel.
Well, it reminds me of. Actually, this is funny. I made the Dragon Ball Z reference earlier, but you guys ever watch it when you were kids?
No.
That's what that was?
Well, there were episodes. I used to watch it as a kid where like there would literally be a full episode where they were just fighting. Like the whole episode was like a fight.
Just a battle.
Like just a battle. And I also think about when I read other fantasy and they do battles where it's, it might be 3 pages that would in reality take up, 15 seconds of fighting, but you get every little detail. And C.S. Lewis almost right. That was weird. C.S. Lewis writes it almost as if it's in real time, where it's like, hey, there's just a bunch of this stuff happening, and then there was silence. You're processing it almost as if you're there yourself. And so I know that for some people that's frustrating because they want to know more of what happened, but this is really what it would be more like if we were eyewitnesses. You would just kind of get all of these things happening at once. It would be so overwhelming to process that's the kind of way that C.S. Lewis approaches his battles, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, you don't get the blow by blow.
No,
you don't
not
get,
at all.
Each individual thing. It's like you said, like if you were there, it would be confusing and then it would be over.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys think that's part of kind of his focus? You've alluded to this in the past where he kind of doesn't focus on the evil as much and in the story and kind of more on the kind of the protagonist good story arc.
I mean, this is a change here definitely in this chapter because we have our evil and, I'm going to include Nickabrick in that if I have to just make it a binary between good and evil. They probably have just as much dialogue and not screen time, but, they have just as much of a focus on them as our good guys do as well. But for the most part, yes, I still think Lewis has usually just chosen to focus on the good. And that's, I think, very purposeful, but also just kind of what it was like coming out of people who were writing at this time. I think we have like the big thing. I feel like we always have anti-heroes now. Let's do this new story. We'll retell it from the bad guy's perspective, and those aren't bad things, but that just doesn't seem to be the way that people were writing 70 years. That's not really the way that fantasy literature was. I mean, look at like Tolkien, especially instead too. But so that's why this chapter is so different, because we spend so much time with the bad guys, and they have a lot of presence here in the text. But I do think that it's almost like because Lewis has held back for so long about seeing from the evil and the bad things, that when we spend time with them, it's legitimately terrifying because we're not used to
the werewolf's like full dialogue of his evil.
Oh yeah,
exposure.
So we get right after this battle is over, this fight, I guess would be a better way to describe it. Trumpkin says weights and water bottles because Edmund is sitting on him. I don't know how that happened, but somehow he's sitting on him. And there's just kind of a lot of figuring out, wait, what's happened here? And, we found out that Nickabrick, the werewolf, and the hag are all dead. So it worked out pretty well for all of them, for our good guys.
Real quick on that point. Someone asked, "Are you all right, Ed?" And Edmund goes, "I think so." And he goes, "I've got that brute Nickabrick, but he's still alive." And then you go down 3 paragraphs, and Nickabrick's dead, which is a little frustrating because it seemed to happen so quickly. But I think it's actually realistic. There isn't usually if someone's dying, I think in this kind of situation, they would go pretty fast.
Well, no, but he's not on Nickabrick. He's sitting on Trumpkin instead. Yeah. He just is confused as to who he's sitting on.
So he goes, and Nickabrick dead too.
I know, but before that, when Edmund says, "I think so," I've got that brute Nickabrick, but he's still alive. The response is, "You're sitting on me, not Nickabrick."
I think I got confused in the fog of war.
Yeah.
Can edit all that out.
That's fine. We're leaving it in.
I don't make mistakes.
What's interesting as they kind of clear up, the dust settles after this fight, is Caspian has a little... I'll just go ahead and read it here. "I'm sorry for Nickabrick," said Caspian, "though he hated me from the first moment he saw me. He had gone sour inside from long suffering and hating. If we had won quickly, he might have become a good dwarf in the days of peace. I don't know which of us killed him. I'm glad of that." Which, one, before we actually delve into some of these words, I think Caspian definitely killed him. That's why he's bringing it up. The fact he's like, I don't know who did it, but I'm glad we don't know. I feel like Caspian totally killed Nickabrick.
That's possible, but in the beginning of the fight, you have Truffle Hunter.
Yeah, it was Truffle Hunter fighting with him.
They've been clashing heads for presumably the entire
It's just
time.
weird that I know what he's saying is like, he was kind of a friend for a while, so it's good that we don't know who has to carry that weight. But part of me also just loves the idea that he's like whistling and like looking to the side, like, "Yeah, guys, I don't.
It wasn't me.
I don't know who did that."
It reminds me of shooting. Is it a shooting gallery? You have a line of people shoot at the person that is to be executed, but only one of them has the bullet.
It's a firing squad.
Firing squad.
A shooting gallery, I think, is like where you go to like practice. Yeah, I don't know.
That are made out of wood.
Yeah, but it's interesting that Caspian acknowledges what we've been talking about, which is that like this is actually really tragic. That
he could have been.
I think he would have been good if we had won. Like, and this proves that it is desperation, not just evil. Like Caspian himself is saying, I think this would have worked out. How tragic that we couldn't solve this before, which makes the Pevensies' lack of faith in following. Like, you think how long it took them to get here. Like. Yeah. They have some responsibility. They have some blood on your hands. Maybe that's a little too aggressive.
I don't know if they have blood on their hands.
Yeah. Because Nickabrick made this choice. You're right. You're right. Yeah. I'll walk that back a little bit. But they definitely, if we want to go down that road for a second, if they could have gotten there faster, we might have been able to avoid what has happened here. And so that makes it actually really sad that like Peter, it's not really Lucy as much, but Peter and Edmund and Susan's lack of faith could have, has brought this terrible situation on, which is, it's sad to see our heroes be in a place where it's like, oh, like people died because you didn't have faith, right?
But that sounds pretty, like that rings true to me, like
People have died because
a lack of faith
Yeah.
has real consequences,
yeah,
There's
and
a real
that's-
responsibility there.
Yeah. And I think, not to kind of over spiritualize this bit here.
that's what we
but
do here. That's fine.
But I feel that often it can just be like, oh yeah, like I'm just working out my life with God and I'm the only one who it affects, but that's not really the case.
Yeah.
It's not an isolated thing.
Exactly. That's not to say that people would die necessarily.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah,
But-
yeah.
I think Caspian demonstrates some very developed wisdom in what he says. It's just acknowledging that if things had been different, he could have been a good dwarf. And
Yeah. How old is Caspian in this
I
setting?
think he's 14.
That is some really tuned in stuff for a 14-year-old.
and he says, though he hated me from the first moment he saw me, he had gone sour inside. All that stuff.
Yeah.
They weren't friends, but he's still,
Yeah.
kind enough to say that.
Thanks to NarniaWeb.com, I can confirm that Caspian is 13 years old in this book.
13.
13.
I'm even more impressed.
It is Peter who is 14. Susan is 13. Edmund's 11. Susie Lucy is 9. There's also, right, I know we're right here at the end of the chapter, but I'm pretty sure that Caspian is now a werewolf, right? He's bitten by the werewolf.
I was wondering that too.
He's yes, I'm bitten, said Caspian. It was that wolf thing. So either werewolves don't transfer the werewolf disease in Narnia's fantasy,
Right.
or he's definitely just going to be a werewolf and doesn't tell anybody about it.
I'm not that tuned into kind of the Brothers Grimm tales and things like that, but as far as I know, zombies and vampires do transfer it when you get bitten, so it sounds legit that if you were bit by a werewolf, you would also become one.
What if you get bit by a man who was in the process of turning into a werewolf? Maybe
As
it's like
this
a
one was?
vaccine, so he'll never turn into a werewolf.
That would be cool.
It seems like, as I was doing just a little bit of like research about werewolves, that it kind of just depends on, like, in some fantasy stories.
Leading researchers agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, as all the werewolf researchers, that it often is just, like, so in Harry Potter it is that way,
Mm-hmm.
that if you're bitten it passes on. In some other fairy tales it's that way, but in other ones it's like you have to be cursed or you're born a werewolf and stuff. So I think we probably should assume that in Narnia it's not transferable through a bite.
Got it.
Or Caspian is a werewolf and we just
don't know it yet.
He never, yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
While we're on this page, I was very impressed with Peter and the way he kind of clarified his presence with Caspian right there at the beginning. He said,
Not here to
"Your
tell-
Majesty is very welcome." And then Peter was like, "By the way, not here to usurp you, just establish you."
Yes,
And I thought that was very mature for a 14-year-old we now know.
definitely.
Yeah. I wouldn't want, and that's what's cool is because Peter has wavered a little bit
Mhm.
in our appreciation for him. Phil and I have expressed like being frustrated at some of his decisions,
Right.
but this is like, yes,
Yeah.
what a leader.
It's like, that was the
great.
right thing. Yeah. So
All right, well, any last thoughts on this chapter before we move on?
doesn't that breakfast sound terrible?
It does.
Sounds awful.
A hard
Especially-
lump of cheese.
I'm starving right now, but even now, no,
Yeah.
like that's
Actual spoiled bear meat.
In contrast to the buttered eggs and coffee, which
Right.
that doesn't even appeal to me, but the two contrasted together,
when
definitely take
when the
buttered eggs
best
and coffee.
part of the breakfast is an onion.
Right.
You
A
know
raw
it's a bad
onion.
breakfast. And I love raw onions, but I don't know if that's like what I'm looking forward to at breakfast.
I'm not going to
time.
bite
Let me
into
just-
it like an apple, though. That's a little
Yeah.
too far.
That's some Lewis Satcher stuff.
It seems like Peter's really coming into his previous kingship when he says, "Let the vermin be flung into a pit."
Pretty intense.
He's getting used to his kingship again, I think.
Yeah. So obviously we end this chapter with them eating breakfast. In the next episode, we have chapter 13 called The High King in Command. And Phil, what do you think is going to happen in that chapter? Just looking at that first page there.
Just looking at the picture, I think they're going to leave the cave
And
and
that's it. You just think they're going to leave the king.
fight the bad guys.
So you think we're now reaching the climax here? That I think we have, 3 chapters ago? 13, 14, 15, right? So you think that that's this big battle between the Telmarines and Narnians, we're looking forward to it this next time we're together?
I think it's coming up.
All right.
Next chapter.
Well, Graham, before we let you go, we have traditionally asked all of our listeners 2 questions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you, how did you first encounter the Chronicles of Narnia?
I would say quite unconventionally. I did not read them as a child. My parents never, to my memory, though I have a bad childhood memory, read them to me. I actually got into them.
Are you saying that you have a bad time remembering your childhood, or you have some bad memories from your childhood?
The former.
Okay.
I have a hard time remembering.
Your good childhood.
I was like, we can
My
turn the
good
recording
childhood.
thing off, and if you want to talk, it's okay.
No, I actually got into them in college one summer. I think it was summer after my junior year. I was home at my parents' house and just must have read through all of them in the course of like a week.
Wait, so your
Whoa.
parents had the books at home but didn't read them to you?
I think that's how it was. Yeah,
I'm really sorry, man.
it's okay.
It's
No,
okay.
it's- like I said, it was otherwise a great childhood.
Yeah.
It was a kind of formative time in my spiritual journey, and I found just enormous amounts of just connection and depth in the storyline here, and I can even remember some specific lines, Aslan, between him and the Pevensies and stuff, just like literally weeping at just kind of like the kind of greater truth of it all. So super significant place in my heart, and yeah, I love the series. I could read it again and again,
Well,
which
great.
I will.
Yeah. We'll have to have you back on another time to go through some of the other books. Well, speaking of those other books too, do you have a favorite Narnian chronicle?
Yeah, I believe when I first did that one summer where I read all the way through them, I think it was The Silver Chair. And I say I think because it has now been a few years since I've read through all of them. But yeah, I just remember distinctly relating to kind of the story arc in that one, and it was really special. So
That's good. Phil, what do you think The Silver Chair is about?
That's the one I remember a lot more of.
Oh, really?
Actually, especially from the movie.
What do
I
you
think
remember?
We've talked about this a little bit. The
The BBC version?
BBC
Yeah.
version of the scene where he is saying Aslan's name. That's all I'll say. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Graham, any last thoughts before we let you go here?
that's all I've got.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. I think you've provided some really good insights into this. I'm
and
sure
some
that...
up the vocabulary a little bit. Used words like usurp.
Yes.
To be honest, I was proud of that one. So
Oh, we're proud of you too. So listeners, if you have enjoyed this episode, you can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. And if you have any feedback, you can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We always appreciate reviews on Apple Podcasts because this helps other listeners find the show. And we appreciate all of y'all who have shared the show just through word of mouth. Our show's themes were created by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more of his work in the links in the episode's description. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time with Chapter 13.